Roughly 2 months prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Russia issued a list of demands to the West in order to ease tensions in Europe and defuse the crisis over Ukraine. Vladimir Putin referred to these demands as security guarantees for Russia. The core demand that raised eyebrows in the West was about NATO's presence in Central and Eastern Europe. Russia demanded that the defensive alliance return to its pre-1997 borders. NATO, which was established in 1949 to counter the Soviet Union, had 16 members until 1997. Since that year, 14 countries have joined NATO, nearly doubling the number of its members. These countries include much of Central and Eastern Europe, and the first NATO states to share borders with Russia and its strategically important oblast Kaliningrad. Of course, if we don't count Norway's small border with Russia in the Arctic. Although Vladimir Putin didn't object to NATO sharing almost an 800-mile border with Russia during the early times of his presidency, later he started to regard it as a threat to Russia's national security. Putin has long warned NATO countries, especially the United States, not to expand eastwards and establish missile defense complexes in Eastern Europe. But the expansion part is a little bit difficult to understand because NATO does not forcefully drag countries into its orbit. Most of its members have joined the alliance as they felt threatened by the Soviet Union and subsequently by the Russian Federation. That's probably the reason Ukraine too wanted to join NATO, a desire that was fiercely opposed by the Russians. Russia considers Ukraine's pursuit of NATO membership one of the main reasons that triggered the invasion, saying it was the huge threat to Russia's national security. But if the Russians hoped that launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine would deter the transatlantic alliance from expanding, Finland and Sweden are about to disappoint them. The two Nordic countries that have remained neutral for decades are giving up on their military non-alignment policy. On May 18, 2022, they submitted formal applications to join NATO, but generally the majority of people in these countries had always been against joining NATO until February 2022. But Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has triggered a U-turn in Finnish and Swedish public opinions on NATO membership. Now the majority of their people are in favor of seeking protection under NATO's Article 5. In short, the Article 5 means that an attack against one NATO member is considered an attack against all the allies. According to Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb, the reason for that swing in the public opinion is national fear. In an interview with DW, he said, quote, "Now our population is being driven by what I call rightly justified national fear. If Putin can slaughter his brothers and sisters in Ukraine, why would he not do the same thing in Finland?" Kind of a nice point. It seems that Russia's intentions to put a curb on NATO's expansion have backfired and created an opportunity for NATO to grow further, and for the two Nordic countries to give up on their neutrality and join NATO. But it's not as simple as it sounds. Joining NATO would bring quite serious risks along with its positive effects. Since the time the two Nordic countries announced their membership intentions, high-ranking Russian officials have repeatedly threatened that there will be the most undesirable consequences. Even Dmitry Medvedev, a close ally of Putin, said it will no longer be possible to talk about any nuclear-free status of the Baltic region. I want to talk about both the positive and negative impacts of Sweden and Finland's possible NATO membership. But let's start with the positive ones. When Russia launched the invasion of Ukraine, it freaked out Sweden and Finland and created an opportunity for them to reconsider their military non-alignment policies. These two Nordic countries are smart and they plan to take advantage of the existing situation to create a faster route to possible NATO membership. They even refused to hold a referendum on joining the alliance as it will take time to organize. So they are in a hurry to apply. NATO is also very excited to have them on board as they will tremendously increase the alliance's military and political assets. That's why NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that NATO will make the process of joining as quick as is feasible once they receive applications from both countries. Finland, which shares an 800-mile border with Russia, has remained neutral since the Finno-Soviet Treaty of 1948. The treaty forbade them to join any military alliance. Prior to that, they also had a bitter war with the Soviet Union, as a result of which they had to cede 10% of of their territory to the USSR. Because the Finns couldn't choose a military alliance, but the Russians have always been breathing down on their neck, they strengthened their own army and never cut the country's defense budget. That's why Finland still has compulsory military service, and they can quickly mobilize an army of 280,000 very competent soldiers. That's a quite big army in modern Europe, and it will dramatically increase NATO's capabilities in terms of armed personnel. Moreover, Finland, together with Sweden, would more or less be ready to join right away. They are all the enhanced opportunity partners of NATO, the closest form of partnership with the alliance. Sweden. The Swedes have a long story of neutrality. They remained neutral since the Napoleonic Wars, during which the country suffered severe territorial losses. They lost over a third of the country's territory, including the loss of Finland to Russia. Today, Sweden would also significantly boost NATO's military and strategic capabilities. The Swedes have a fantastic navy in the Baltic Sea, with 5 very modern submarines, which will help NATO fleets to protect the Baltic Sea. Sweden has also a very competent air force, with 100 modern fighter jets. The defense industry in Sweden is very developed. They manufacture different types of sophisticated and high-tech products. But most importantly, if the Swedes join NATO, they will also bring the island of Gotland, which has strategic importance for the defense of both the Baltic Sea and the Baltic states. The island of Gotland is currently one of the main reasons of Sweden's Russia fears. In recent weeks, the Swedes have significantly increased their military personnel on the island. Gotland is located about 150 miles north of the Kaliningrad naval base and faces the 3 Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania to the east. These 3 are former Soviet countries and have been fully fledged NATO members since 2004. And Kaliningrad is a Russian exclave that got sandwiched between Poland and Lithuania, the 2 NATO members, after the dissolution of the USSR. Kaliningrad forms part of a protective arc of Russia, ranging from the Arctic and the Barents Sea through the Baltic Sea to Crimea and the Black Sea. The Russians have built up very strong anti-access area denial or A2AD weapon systems there. In the event of war, they will deny NATO unrestricted use of the Baltic Sea area by disrupting land, naval and air operations in much of the Baltic Sea region. They would also threaten access through the Baltic Straits and make it extremely difficult for the Americans to reach and defend their fellow NATO countries bordering Russia. That's exactly where Sweden Scotland comes in. Though widely seen today as a holiday destination, it's always been valued for its strategic location for centuries. Military analysts often consider Gotland a big unsinkable aircraft carrier in the middle of the Baltic Sea. If Sweden joins the alliance, then NATO air forces will be able to use Gotland's airfields to repulse Russian air and missile attacks, as well as provide air support for NATO military operations in the Baltics. Gotland's largest port of Visby can also serve as a logistical hub for NATO forces in the Baltics. So far so good, but there are risks too, as I mentioned earlier. Now let's talk about the negative outcomes of the 2 Nordic countries' possible NATO membership. First and foremost is the possibility of a nuclear conflict in the Baltics. Russia has deployed Onyx anti-ship cruise missiles, Iskander missiles and Kalibr land attack cruise missiles in Kaliningrad. These 3 are all nuclear capable, meaning that they can carry nuclear warheads. The Iskander system has a range of up to 440 miles and could reach all the surrounding capitals, including Stockholm, Helsinki, Warsaw and even Berlin. But there is no official information on whether there are nuclear warheads in Kaliningrad or not. There were during the Cold War, but not now, according to Moscow. But the Federation of American Scientists analyzed satellite images and concluded that the Russians had carried out a major renovation of what seemed to be an active nuclear weapon storage site in Kaliningrad. However, they were unable to determine whether the nuclear warheads were already being stored there or would be moved there in the event of war. Unlike the analysts, Lithuania's defense minister Arvyda Anušauskas is totally certain that nuclear warheads are present in Kaliningrad. He said nuclear weapons have always been kept in Kaliningrad, and the countries in the region are perfectly aware of that. Apart from that, 2 weeks ago Russia's defense minister said its forces in the Baltic Fleet held a nuclear drill in Kaliningrad and successfully practiced simulated nuclear-capable missile strikes. It's a clear message by the Russians to NATO. Don't let them in or I will nuke them before they get official NATO protection. So the question is not what will happen if Sweden and Finland join NATO, it's what will happen from the time they officially apply for membership until they become fully fledged members. That's exactly why last week British Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Finland and Sweden to sign out documents to formally issue security guarantees to both countries. Jens Stoltenberg also said that in the interim period, NATO will increase its presence in the Baltic region. I think it all kind of all changes the long-lasting neutrality policies of the two countries. But still, it cannot be compared to NATO's deterrence and common defense as guaranteed by NATO's Article 5. And the risk of Sweden and Finland's possible NATO membership is about Lithuania. You might say, wait, what? What does Lithuania have to do with it? Let me explain. If the two countries join NATO, it will make the Baltic Sea basically a NATO lake, and Russia's Kaliningrad will be effectively surrounded by NATO states on all sides. It will be Russia's worst nightmare. It's the total opposite of what they hoped for when they launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Kaliningrad is significantly important for Russia, as I mentioned earlier, but it's also a liability for Russia. An exclave is always difficult to defend. It's even worse when reinforcements need to cross another country, especially if it's an enemy country. That's where the Suwalki Gap comes in. It's a 6-mile-long land corridor that connects Kaliningrad to Belarus, Russia's closest ally. But at the same time, this corridor connects the 3 Baltic NATO countries to Poland and the rest of NATO. It's a very sensitive piece of land and very tough to defend since it's comprised of flat farmlands. It's a headache for both NATO and Russia. Therefore, the risks are very high that Russia might try to seize that corridor by invading Lithuania, even before Sweden and Finland become NATO members. Yes, I know Lithuania is a NATO country and it's protected under NATO's Article 5, but we have already seen that Russia is not taking calculated risks. With Vladimir Putin's desire to retake certain former Soviet territories, the Baltic states, especially Lithuania, could be his next target. By seizing that piece of land, Putin would connect Kaliningrad to mainland Russia and cripple NATO in the Baltic Sea region by preventing military assistance from the other NATO countries to reach the Baltic countries. I know it all sounds crazy, but a dreadful catastrophe is unfolding in Europe right in front of our eyes, and it poses a huge threat to the continent. Finland and Sweden's possible NATO membership might really affect the already aggravated situation to such an extent that it might reach the point of no return. But let's hope that this conflict won't go that far and will be resolved very soon, peacefully.